Yes, sir. All right. A warm welcome to everybody to this 17th live stream of Engineering Trainer TV. I'm logging in live from the Engineering Trainer studio in the Netherlands. My name is Luc Hennen. I'm the CEO of Engineering Trainer. Today we are going to have a conversation with Colin Pimley, a specialist on pressure equipment directive with a very long and respectful career at various notified bodies. And we're going to talk about various key topics within the PED and ask his take on that. We had some technical issues, getting started. That happens sometimes. That was a bit stressful. Colin, other than that, how is your day going so far?
Fine, thank you, Luke. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Hopefully, the technical issues won't interrupt anymore. Just checking? Do you hear me okay? See me okay?
We definitely do. Thanks for confirming.
Okay, good.
And indeed, fingers crossed. Let's hope it the connection stays stable. It's a great pleasure to have you on, Colin. Before we dive into the topic of today and the conversation of today, let me also provide a warm welcome to everybody who's watching this live stream from around the world. And please, to everybody watching, join the chat, the YouTube chat. Ask questions, provide comments, share your thoughts on specific matters. I'll make sure to include them in the discussions. And as always, in our live streams, as a starting point, it seems that we had Colin dropping out just now. Let's see if he comes back in real quick. There we go. As always, everybody who's watching, please share from where in the world you are joining. It's always great to get some connections going and see from where all the different locations globally where people are logging in. And I also invite everybody, as always, to follow us on LinkedIn, Engineering Trainer, or on YouTube. Those are two great ways to stay up to date about any of our activities. And one of which is our new masterclasses on Engineering Trainer. For those who want to, expand their knowledge further after this live stream, let me just briefly share my screen. Let's switch to me sharing my screen. There we go. So we recently, this is the Engineering Trainer homepage. We recently added a new learning format to our portfolio, which are the masterclasses. And those are 2-hour, very dense, very active. We released the masterclasses on engineeringtrainer.com, and those are 2 hours instructor-led workshops, so to speak, about a very specific topic. They're available for anybody to join. They're free for our business users. So I do invite you to check them out, and we will run a continuous schedule for those on various topics. One of which Colin will be providing on the pressure equipment directive, so the role of harmonized versus and non-harmonized standards. So we'll also briefly touch on that today. And as a final note, anybody who's watching today and joining us, or anybody who's tuning in, will receive a 15% discount coupon to any course of your choice. The link to obtain that discount coupon will be in the show notes and in the chat, in the show notes below the video, or in the chat of the live stream. Leave your email there, then you will receive that voucher in your email in no time. Having said that, let's get started, Colin. I think you're comfortable. I think the phone is off, so that's great. Maybe, Colin, like I've know we've spoken many times before. I know you've worked in various notified bodies. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and your background and also your current activities and relationship in context of the PED.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, you are right, Luke. I've had a fairly lengthy involvement with the Pressure Equipment Directive. In fact, as you can probably tell from looking at me, I'm actually old enough to remember a time before we actually had the PED. So, you know, I've worked with it, as I say, since its first publication way back in 1997, would you believe?
Wow.
So obviously that's, you know, I've seen the sort of some of the changes that it's brought along in terms of how pressure equipment, you know, is handled from a regulatory perspective. But my own sort of career started off as doing a mechanical engineering degree, and then moving into working for a manufacturer of water tube boilers
Mm,
initially. So high temperature, high pressure equipment.
right.
And then ended up sort of working in their design department, working on the design of the pressure parts, superheaters, reheaters, and that kind of equipment. Um, and then after a period, I sort of jumped over the fence, if you like, into the world of conformity assessment,
Mm,
and yeah, eventually ended up working again by now, obviously, with predominantly with the Pressure Equipment Directive for a couple of well-known notified bodies, and eventually taking on the role of technical management for those activities.
yeah.
And then more recently, having decided to work as an independent freelancer, still working basically in that sector, doing consultancy and training, and obviously working with yourselves more latterly. But other sort of areas that I'm involved in now would be predominantly, I work as one of the, and it's perhaps relevant to today's discussion in a way. Um, I work as part of the process supporting the European Commission
Mm,
on the, if you like, on the vetting or the checking of these harmonised standards in the sector, the pressure equipment sector. Um,
right.
which is kind of an interesting, perspective on that whole process.
Yeah.
And also, I also work now as an independent technical assessor for the UK's accreditation body. So I'm sort of looking at how the notified bodies, perform their activities, making sure they're sufficiently, impartial, independent, and of course
Yeah.
technically competent, to do their conformity assessment activities. So,
Yeah.
but obviously, I just do need to sort of make it clear that obviously all the views and opinions that you hear today are obviously just my own personal views. So yes, that's kind of how I arrived at where I am today.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you mentioned that you're involved with the, supporting the European Union, vetting all the codes and standards. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? Like, what does that process look like? Is there a committee that comes together every once in a while, or is there a like who is the employer in this case? What does that process look like? It's a little bit of a black box to me personally, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah, I can well imagine that from the outside, if you're not sort of intimately involved in it, it does seem quite opaque as to how these standards are, developed and published and so on. But I mean, in sort of simple terms, the European Commission, once they've, if you like, published a directive in a particular area, so obviously we're talking about pressure equipment,
Yeah,
they then basically issue an instruction, if you like, or we call it a mandate to CEN, which is the European standards body,
yeah,
to develop technical standards for products primarily that, if you like, are there to help manufacturers achieve compliance with, if you like, the legal requirements of for example, the Pressure Equipment Directive. So
yeah,
all of the, if you like, the initial development work of the drafts of the standards is done by various technical committees, obviously of, subject matter experts
yeah,
in a particular field. And then there's a fairly lengthy process where the drafting goes through a number of stages of, if you like, assessment by both the other national bodies who participate in CEN, and then eventually there's a stage where, if you like, the wider stakeholders can actually see the drafts, make comments, and all of that obviously has to be, managed and reconciled. And you can probably imagine that it's quite an
big
administrative
process.
task to keep all of that sort of moving. But of course, part of that process is that because these harmonized standards have a particular legal status now,
Yeah,
in something we may well come on to talk about, this so-called presumption of conformity.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, the European Commission are looking to be as, if you like, confident as they reasonably can that when they publish the reference of a particular standard, which gives it its status as a harmonized standard, that the content, if you like, of that standard is, good enough
yeah,
to provide a solution to the respective essential safety requirements in the directive. So,
yeah,
because the Commission people, are, if you like, are not technical people, they then look to experts, if you like, or consultants, as they call us, to provide that sort of independent view on a particular draft standard as to whether it meets a certain threshold,
yeah.
um, in terms of technical content. So that's kind of where that role sort of fits into the overall picture.
Yeah. Now, I know that like getting a draft of a industry standard, whether we're talking, ASME or EN, out for the committee making it is a lengthy process in itself, and something that they put a lot of energy in. So then, if I understand it correctly, once that draft is finished, it first goes to, for example, you and perhaps some other consultants that are hired to review it and see if it fully complies with the
Yeah.
PED, maybe especially the ESRs, the essential safety requirements.
Yeah.
I mean that. Uh, can you give us some idea on the timeline of that? For example, I know that drafting a new or adjusting a industry standard can take a couple of years. Let's say 2 years.
It could, yes. I mean, Luke, and unfortunately, and I think this is one of the areas where I think everybody recognises, and including, the European Commission, that that the process, because of all the stages that have to be gone through, and because the ultimate status of these standards now, which has been clarified by some recent judgments coming from the European Court of Justice, that once they are published and cited as harmonized standards, they effectively become part of the body of EU law.
Yeah,
So, if you like, because of that, as I say, the Commission, wants to take great care
yeah,
to ensure that they meet this certain threshold of competent requirements, if you like.
yeah,
But if you like, the downside of that, if you like, is the fact that it takes time
yeah,
to work through all of the issues, and so it's obviously difficult to give a typical. There's no sort of average value. But it could equally be from 6 months to literally to, yes, a couple of years to get a standard through those hurdles. But
yeah,
yeah, it's kind of that's the process that everyone has to kind of work to.
Yeah. Once it's in there, it's and it's hard to you know like undo that if you run into an error. So it has to be done right. That makes total sense.
Yep.
Um, so thanks for elaborating. And you mentioned already one thing that was quite interesting that I would like to use maybe also as a little bit of a bridge to one of the other webinars, live streams that we gave. Our previous live stream was about water hammer phenomena in pressurized piping systems. And you just mentioned the assumption of conformity. If you use, for example, a EN 13480 code, which is the European code for process piping. So is maybe I can briefly share my screen. Let me just jump real quick to the actual pressure equipment directive. Like I was searching for water hammer in there, and it is mentioned amongst others in the essential safety requirements.
Yeah.
That it says adequate means shall be provided for the draining and venting of pressure equipment where necessary to avoid harmful effects such as water hammer, vacuum collapse, corrosion, uncontrolled chemical reactions. So does that mean, what is the link? How is the link defined between the PED, this statement, and, for example, the EN 3480? Are all details of the let's say you do the EN 3480, are you then automatically in compliance with all the requirements from the PED?
Unfortunately not, Luke. No, not necessarily. And I think this is probably, from my sort of recent experience, an area that is often not quite fully appreciated, in the sense that, as I say, we talk about this presumption of conformity by using the harmonized standard.
Yeah.
But I think what's often missed is that the presumption of conformity is, if you like, limited in the sense that the harmonized standard, and we happen to be talking about EN 13480, for example. Now, I don't know if at your end, Luke, you're actually able to share an example of that particular standard or not.
I don't,
It's
unfortunately. Yeah.
and it's probably a little bit difficult, I mean, for me to try and share it from my end, but essentially, what you find within the harmonized standards is pretty much towards the back end of the standard. There is something called an Annex ZA, and basically what that is, it's a list of one or more of the essential requirements from the PED, and it's, if you like, a correlation between the essential requirement and the clause or clauses from within the particular standard that are, if you like, considered to provide a solution to the essential requirement.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's important to realize that the vast majority of the PED harmonized standards, certainly for the products, although it's correct to say they probably address the majority of the essential safety requirements, but you can't just assume that they will address all of the essential safety requirements that may be applicable to your particular piece of pressure equipment, whether
Yeah.
it's a piping or a pressure vessel or, a valve or whatever.
Yeah.
So, as I said, you need to really look to the Annex ZA to see exactly which of the ESRs the standard, if you like, is considered to provide this presumption of conformity to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just be aware that because of your fundamental hazard and risk analysis that you do before you start the whole process, you may well have identified that there are some ESRs that are relevant to your equipment, but for which the standard, the harmonized standard, does not provide a solution as described in the Annex ZA. So in those kind of cases, of course, then
Yeah, how should
it's
you deal with that?
well, it's kind of left then to the manufacturer to, if you like, develop and propose often, because in many cases the assessment will be being done by the notified body, but they need to document within their technical documentation their, if you like, their technical solution, their engineering solution, if you like, to meet those ESRs that the harmonized standard is not providing a solution for.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think, to be honest, that this is really important to emphasize. Also, something that confused me, when I was using the EN34 for 480, sorry, at the start, is that Annex ZA, if I summarize you correctly, is where it's one of the appendices of the codes and standards. For example, the EN3480.
mhm.
Is it the same in, for example, the EN3445? Is it always Annex ZA, Colin?
It's usually if the standard is only related to one particular product directive, and obviously many of the PED product standards are really aimed
Yeah,
principally at supporting the pressure equipment directive, but there can be certain types of products where they may also be subject to other directives. And one that sort of springs to my mind would be, for example, EN378, which is for refrigeration systems, where
mm,
you've very much got a coverage by, of course, the pressure equipment directive, but also that standard is really aimed at supporting compliance to the machinery
right.
regulation as it is now. So
Yeah,
in those kind of cases, you will find there will be a dedicated annex for the PED compliance, and there'll be a separate dedicated annex for
right.
the compliance. So they then get, one will be called a Annex ZA, and there'll be an Annex ZB,
Yeah,
maybe an Annex ZC
yeah,
if it's covered by an additional directive. But
yeah,
yeah, where there's only one directive that the standard is supporting, then it's just referred to as the Annex ZA.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay. So one way or another, that's the place where one should look. It's always the Z, and then either A, B, C, etc., depending on the exact
yeah,
content.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Um, all right. So thanks for sharing. I mean, I know that is definitely something that has some confusion in the for example, with some engineers that might think, as long as I use the code, the industry standard EN3480 or any of those harmonized codes, then I'm fine. Then I don't really need to delve into the details of the PED and the link between them. But that is a little bit of short-sighted, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Luke. And like I say, different standards, will cover a different range, of the ESRs. Some will cover, the majority of the ESRs. Others, for various reasons, might only cover quite a limited number,
Yeah.
which then, as we just said, if like means more sort of work from the manufacturer to actually develop those additional technical solutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Thanks for sharing, Colin. Let me just share the some slides that we can use to facilitate our conversation further. There we. Oh, I think they're gone. Oh, let me give it another shot. Yeah. Um, yeah, there they are. Um, what I would like to do, Colin, is just to jump into the topic of, maybe zooming out a little bit. What is the PED, and why does it exist in the first place? We prepared some notes. Maybe you can give your take on these questions. What is the PED, and why does it exist?
Yeah, sure. I think actually maybe looking at that slide, Luke, I think there may be another slight bit of animation that still needs to come in there because
You're right.
um, yeah. So I think you can obviously discuss about where does it fundamentally kind of stem from, but I always tend to think back towards this thing you can see there, the Treaty of Rome, which dates way back to 1957, and obviously at the very early stage of the development of what was originally called the European Community, and of course over time evolved into what we now know today as the European Union.
Yeah.
But yeah, so right back then, one of the founding principles was to create what are known as the four freedoms, the free movement, as you can see, of people, services, finance, and goods.
Right.
And of course, it's the goods, the free movement of goods, fundamentally that has resulted in the PED, and of course a whole suite of other product regulations. And simply it's about taking down or removing what I've referred to there as technical barriers to trade, between different countries, different member states. Like I said at the start, I'm of an age where I can remember the time before the PED, and
Yeah.
life was very different then. If you were a manufacturer of pressure equipment and you wanted to sell your products not just in your own domestic market but to export, then you had to understand first of all what were the regulatory requirements for your
Yeah.
products
Yeah.
in the individual markets that you were looking to gain entry to,
Yeah.
and we're faced with the reality that, of course, each country, each member state, recognize the need to have regulations to protect people from, hazards due to certain products,
Yeah.
and of
Yeah.
course, pressure equipment is a clear example of where that those potential hazards exist. So, each member state had developed their own way of dealing with that, in terms of whether it be the types of standards that had to be used or the types of bodies that had to be involved in,
Yeah.
the conformity assessment and certification. And so, although they were all aimed at achieving the same, end result, i.e., safety, protection of people and property, and so on,
Yeah. They're
they
different.
all
Yeah.
achieved it by very slightly different ways. And so,
Yeah.
that did mean that if you did want to access these different markets, you ended up needing potentially to have multiple assessments and approvals of that same product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clearly, not inducive to to business and international trade. So,
Yeah.
like I say, uh, they came up with this idea of, as we've said there, basically agreeing to a single set of requirements that would apply across, as it is now, the European Union,
Yeah.
and indeed those countries in the European Economic Area as well, such that, by subjecting your product to a single assessment against a common set of requirements, you know that that product must, through the purposes, of set up through the treaty,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
allowed free movement into all the territories of the EU and the EEA. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Which
yeah,
is a
that's
big
kind of,
gain. Yeah.
yeah, and it's, if you like, part of what is often referred to as the creation of the EU's single market.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Just to zoom in there, like I mean, we already touched base on the lengthy process and the energy, the effort that goes into having a new harmonized standard being released and checking that with respect to the PED. I can imagine it's been quite a work project to get the first version of the PED fully approved and out. Do you know if there's a continuous process ongoing to release a we're currently at 2014 68 EU, if I'm not mistaken,
mhm.
to get into a new version in the future, and or are there more like small amendments happening continuously? Like how is the process forward, do you anticipate a new version coming out at some point?
That's difficult to say for sure, Luke. Or what I can say for sure is that, currently, the Commission is actually conducting what is called an evaluation of the PED.
Hmm.
So, I believe that, if like, it's part of their internal processes, that they are required periodically to review, various pieces of legislation,
Right.
to make sure that they are still kind of relevant, efficient, etc. And for sure, that is, as I say, right now, that is an ongoing process that the Commission has requested.
Yeah.
Timing wise, I believe it's coming towards the end of the actual investigation and surveys, and evaluation.
All right.
And yes, at some point, I think probably this year, a final report will be prepared and submitted to the European Commission. And of course, I'm certainly not party to what that's likely to conclude. Um, and one of the outcomes, yes, could be that there are certain areas where it's felt that the need is sufficiently strong
Yeah.
that for the Commission to engage in, if you like, a technical revision or updating
Yeah.
of the PED. But it's very difficult to know for sure.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
going to depend on what kind of input they've had from, the stakeholders, as to whether they do feel there are some major problems with the PED that need to be rectified or not.
Yeah. 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 But it's interesting to get a little bit of context on what is happening in the background. That review. Thanks for sharing that, Colin. I would like to move forward. Like the other topic that we selected is how is the directive applied, Colin? Now, obviously, we can talk about this for days. Let me just segue a little bit into the workflow that we typically use in our slides for the PED. Let me just fully put it in the slides.
Okay.
And also with respect of time, Colin,
Yeah.
what I want to do is really zoom into those two, and then in particularly the second of these dark blue items. So obviously there's
Okay.
different steps involved with the PED, ending up with the CE marking. I know that this is something you'll dive into each of these blocks during the masterclass, or at least during the training. Let me just
Yeah.
jump you know,
Okay.
the first block now. So maybe you can share, you know, a little bit on the classification of equipment, which is like a set of steps that is really at the core of the process, to my knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah. Hopefully, everyone can see that the slide now on the screen. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Luke. That this classification of the equipment is completely fundamental to being able to apply the PED, you know, properly. Um, and as hopefully everyone can see there, you need to have determined a number of input parameters before you can do, you know, a successful classification.
Yeah.
And really, if you like, I tend to try and get this over in the sense of thinking that about this process as literally as a risk-based approach, so
Mm.
that one of the fundamental risks, if you like, that the process uses is a measure of the stored energy within a given piece of pressure equipment.
Yeah.
So, and fundamentally, the way that that is assessed and, if you like, quantified is by the two terms at the bottom of the slide there. So the pressure, obviously, if you like, that the equipment is subject to, and then, if you like, one of two measures of, if you like, its size. You know, its
Maybe
dimension.
let me jump to one of the tables that we have available as well, Colin. I think
Yeah.
that
Okay.
that
So
clarifies it.
this one, as hopefully everyone can see, is one of the 9 tables in the PED. This one is for, as you can see, for pressure vessels which contain what we call a Group 1 gas. And okay, we may or may not have time to sort of delve a little bit further into that. But as you can see, it's what is sometimes referred to as the more hazardous type of fluids.
Mm.
And yeah, as you can see, fundamentally, you've got on the vertical axis there, you've got the pressure PS in bar, and then across the horizontal there, you've got a measure of the volume of your pressure vessel in liters.
Yeah. Right.
And as you can see, it's kind of on a log scale basis, but fundamentally, hopefully everyone can see that as you increase the product of the pressure and the volume, so if you like, your stored energy is increasing, and then combined with the, if you like, the hazardous nature of the contained fluid as well, then through these tables you are able to assign a, if you like, a risk rating to your equipment.
Mm.
And as we can see, you know, we eventually pass a threshold, which I can't quite actually read myself now, where I think it's
1,000 PS times
1,000.
V is a
Yes.
thousand. Yeah.
So once your pressure times your volume is greater than 1,000 bar liters, then your pressure vessel is in the, if you like, the highest category that the PED sort of foresees, which is category 4. But obviously, for slightly lower combinations of pressure and volume, then,
Yeah.
you know, there are thresholds for lower categories. You know, category 3, 2, 1, and then down in that sort of bottom left-hand corner, you have that region there, which is labelled Article 4, Paragraph 3,
Yeah.
which in brackets I think says SEP, and this is the strange world of sound engineering practice.
Yeah.
Um,
Before let's dive into that a little bit deeper in a moment, Colin. I think that's actually a very interesting topic to discuss. Um, like I have a question about this table. If I go to the PED, let me just open it real quick. I know that there's, once, let me just go down a little bit. Here we are at these tables, right?
Yep.
If I go up at the top here, there's this let's say table.
Yeah.
And here we see those Roman numbers again, right? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And then it says various modules. So the
Yeah.
different conformity assessment modules.
Yeah.
It says various with a plus and sometimes with a comma in between. Let's say you're category 3. Does that mean you need to comply with all these modules, or just a set of
No.
them?
No. So hopefully you can see that against each category there are certain, well, apart from, let's say, category 1, okay, where there is the single module A, but for the other 3 categories, basically what they're presenting you with there is a choice, if you like, a number of options for the conformity assessment procedures. So you basically need to pick one of those, if you like, available.
Right.
And again, there's it's maybe another subject for another discussion, but obviously, I'm pretty sure that the PED, certainly from all the product regulations that I've been involved in, has the widest range of possible options of conformity assessment procedures of any product regulation or directive.
Really?
Now, you know, there's probably a reasonable argument for that, and I'm sure the commission would say that they wanted to offer manufacturers the widest possible range of options of
Yeah.
conformity assessment procedures. But from my perspective, if you like, delivering kind of training, and so on, of course, it means you have to actually cover
A
all of
lot.
those permutations. So, but yeah, so no, you certainly don't need to. It's absolutely not. It's not saying that you need to meet all of those on a given line. It's just you choose one of those from those list of options.
All right. Thanks for shedding some light on that. Now let's segue back to these plots, and then
Yeah,
obviously Article 4, Paragraph 3, sound engineering practice. I know that there's also a guideline in relation to this.
yeah,
Maybe you can clarify a little bit. Like there's, I've had confusion about this myself. We've had various questions about this in through the courses that we run.
hmm,
This is always a bit of a topic of confusion, and to my knowledge, like where the confusion comes from is that for a designer it's very comfortable to be able to lean on a industrial standard, EN 3445, EN 3480, or any other that
yeah,
feels a little bit like a guidebook, and as long as I'm sticking to the rules there, then I'm making good design. And then all of a sudden this sound engineering practice comes in where it's unclear, do I need to use it, do I not need to use it, what is the
yeah,
alternative? Can you
yeah.
shed some light on sound engineering practice? How do you view this?
Um, well, you mentioned, Luke, that that there is a guideline, and I don't know, maybe we should perhaps just sort of say a couple of introductory remarks about the guidelines in general, in
Yeah,
case
that makes sense.
some people are not already familiar with them.
Yeah,
But
I just opened them, by the way, but please
yeah,
continue.
I can see that you're sharing that now. Um, And yes, for those that aren't aware, these are effectively the most authoritative interpretations on the PED that we have available to us, and um, they. I think, as it says in one of those introductory paragraphs there, which is a little bit small for me to read right now, but I think it says something along the lines of these represent, unless it states otherwise, the unanimous view of the member states. So on the one hand, you kind of have to accept that because of their description, they are guidelines. So of course, you are free, if you like, to choose to either follow them or not. But if you're not going to follow the recommendations in the guidelines, then you kind of should be aware that in the event, for example, of an action by one of the authorities, or worst case, through a court case, a legal case, then these guidelines will be referred to as it says here, the unanimous view of the member states. So the sort of strong recommendation, I guess, is that wherever possible, try and follow the recommendations. Now, when it comes to sound engineering practice, I'm hoping, Luke, that you can find the guideline, which is where I always sort of point people when this question arises, which, yes, as I think you've found, which is guideline I01.
Yeah, let me just pick
If
it up real
you're able
quick.
to share that.
May I just comment on what you just said? Like you mentioned, like you don't have to follow the guidelines, but if you end up in a legal debate, these will be interpreted as the official interpretations. I think you have to be fair. You have to be very strong-minded and very confident in what you're doing to not use them. Am I correct, or at least be able to convince a notified body?
Yeah, I think that's probably correct. But like I say, you have that option if you believe, if you like, strongly enough that there is an alternative way of, if you like, dealing with the issue that the guideline is talking about. Then yeah, you have that freedom, to do so. So yeah, and in fact, some of the guidelines, perhaps, if you like, looking at this particular one, as an example, and I guess I am hoping that people can read that okay. But
just to be clear, sorry for interrupting. These guidelines are available to download for free.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the European Union
but
website.
if you just Google search, the PED guidelines, I'm pretty sure you can find them fairly easily. They're downloadable as all of them are synced together in a single PDF, and they're broken down into a number of different kind of subject kind of classifications. And obviously it's useful because you can actually search through the whole set, using keywords, to see if there's maybe a guideline on a particular issue that you're concerned with. So yeah, I always commend people to sort of be aware of these and look to see if possibly there's something which might help with a given question.
Yeah. So maybe I should read it out loud, since we're making very clear references.
It's not a particularly long answer, as you can see. So yeah, why not?
So question: what is understood by quote unquote sound engineering practice? Answer: sound engineering practice means, without prejudice to Article 5, Paragraph 1, that such pressure equipment is designed taking into account all relevant factors influencing its safety. Furthermore, such equipment is manufactured, verified, and delivered with instructions for use in order to ensure its safety during its intended life, when used in foreseeable or reasonable foreseeable conditions. The manufacturer is responsible for the application of sound engineering practice. Maybe you can comment on that.
Well, it's quite difficult, Luke, to sort of obviously sort of say a huge amount more than what's kind of there in the official answer, and it, on the other hand, it does, I suppose, indicate why the question still arises, because that last sentence there is the key one. It's up to the manufacturer
Yeah.
to decide what they consider to be sound engineering practice.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people ask me, what is sound engineering practice, I'm tempted to say, if it's a manufacturer, for example, well, surely it should be what you are actually doing now already.
Right.
Which, if you like, okay, it sounds a little bit simplistic, but actually, if you think about it, if you are a manufacturer of, SEP pressure equipment, and you're not really comfortable with your current processes for, the designing of the equipment, the selection of the materials, the manufacturing methods and testing, then you shouldn't really be, if you like, putting your product on the market.
Right.
And that, as I said, that might be a slightly, as I say, glib, a sort of way of answering the question, but actually, I think it's not an unreasonable way to sort of turn the question round and say, well, surely you must feel confident that your processes are what you consider to be sound engineering practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you get my point.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, like it has to do with confidence and being able and like confident enough to justify that in any situation that follows after you're putting it in the market, if I understand you
yeah,
correctly. Would you say that if a manufacturer, let's say we're talking about a um, pressurized vessel of some sort that is in the scope of the EN 13445, so let's say a manufacturer says, well, I mean, we're in the segment of sound engineering practice in that plot. We want to use the EN 13445 anyway because it gives
yeah,
us some something to work with. Is that
yeah.
like is that like a no-brainer, or do you see a lot of manufacturers
Uh,
not doing that?
yeah, I mean, I was thinking, I think most people would probably agree that the obvious place to sort of start to make your basis for claiming sound engineering practice would be the implementation of relevant standards.
Right.
Now whether that's the harmonized standard or other standards like the ASME codes and standards, but if they are, if like, clearly relevant to the type of product that you are supplying, then, like I say, that seems to me to be a very good basis on which to be able to demonstrate, compliance with sound engineering practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. All right. Uh, and if not, if I segue back to your original answer, as long as from both the physics as the if I summarize you correctly, both the physical design and calculations to support the design, as well as the manufacturing, etc. You're able to prove, hey, this is a good way of doing things. It might be slightly different from EN 3445, but it's very solid and well
Yeah,
thought of process. As long as you're able to confidently prove that, then that is what you could use to back up sound engineering practice, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. And again, you should have perhaps always kind of again bear in mind that the sound engineering practice equipment is, and again, this is perhaps one of the other points I was wanting to make, which is a sort of another sort of misconception that I do kind of find, is that people say, well, my equipment is sound engineering practice, therefore it's outside of the PED, and that's just not the correct conclusion to make. It's as you could see from that example of the table that we looked at. You know, if your pressure vessel, as the example we're looking at, you know, once it passes above that bottom horizontal line there of 0.5 bar gauge, then it effectively is within the scope of the PED.
Right.
Okay. It's just that the classification rating of it places it into the category of sound engineering practice.
Yeah.
So again, that's a sort of slight misconception that you sometimes come across.
Yeah.
And again, the other sort of, I suppose, area that's, you know, this SEP category brings along, and again, I can't think of a similar situation in another product directive where you've got a series of products covered by the directive, some of which are required to undergo, you know, one of those conformity assessment procedures to demonstrate compliance with the essential requirements, at the end of which, you know, you issue the declaration of conformity and you apply the CE marking.
Yeah.
But equally, there's another set of products that are covered by the directive, but for which the legal requirement is only sound engineering practice.
Yeah.
And because of that, the directive says you're actually not permitted to put the CE mark on those products.
All right. So just to confirm, like for sound engineering practice categorized items, you don't CE mark them.
Under the PED, it's very clear you are not allowed to CE mark those products.
Right.
But again, unfortunately, yet another sort of slight potential for complication is that some of those products, those SEP products, may also fall within the scope of another directive,
right,
which does require them to be CE marked.
Oh, that's confusing. Yeah.
So
How should one deal with that?
So yeah, you kind of need to, you know, have that awareness that so long as it's not CE marked by under the PED,
right,
but because it's required by some other directive or regulation, then that's okay. But if it's purely PED SEP equipment, then it must not be CE marked.
Yeah. That's an interesting point you make there. If a different directory would require it, you need to, you know, CE marking. You need to explicitly, mention this on the CE mark. Is that correct?
Sorry, Luke, I didn't quite catch that last.
So if a different directive that is applicable to your design does require CE marking, then you need to explicitly mention that on the CE mark. Is that correct?
Well, actually, again, this is another sort of another difficult aspect of the whole kind of structure of this CE marking principles, which is you can't actually tell purely by looking that the equipment has a CE marking on it.
Yeah.
You can't actually tell under which regulation or directive that CE mark has been applied.
Yeah.
You can't see it physically just by looking at the equipment. The only way you can actually determine that is by looking at the accompanying declarations of conformity.
Right. Yeah.
Just again, one of those features of how the process is set up.
Yeah. Colin, I mean, very interesting discussions. Given the time, we have one more topic, but I would like to leave that one for the masterclass. So some discussions on harmonized versus non-harmonized standards. If this is, you know, to any of the listeners, if this is, you know, it's a very relevant topic. If this is relevant for your line of work, you know, consider joining the masterclass. When I would segue back a little bit, I think you just mentioned something interesting. and we spoke about this briefly in preparations of this session. Like if we look at the entire CE marking workflow, one of the steps is to set up and sign the declaration of conformity.
Yeah.
Like one of the questions I would have is, who checks the declaration of conformity? Who is responsible that it is correct? Do the manufacturers or the NOBOs or some other legislative body, do they need to be involved with that? How what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, fundamentally, the directive is quite clear in this regard. It's the declaration of conformity is prepared and signed by the manufacturer of the equipment,
Right.
which I guess if you think about it is quite sort of logical and obvious. They are the people who have that fundamental responsibility for ensuring the equipment complies.
Yeah.
But if we look at the template, if you like, for the declaration, which is included in the PED itself
Yeah.
in Annex 4, then you will see that amongst the sort of provisions that have to be included is, for example, not just description of what the equipment is, but also things like what standards have been applied, in terms of the basis for compliance, whether those are harmonised standards or other standards. But then, as I think maybe people may realise, that for many of the higher risk categories of the equipment, then a notified body, has to be involved in one way or another, according to the specific procedure in the conformity assessment process.
Yeah.
And again, in those cases, the declaration has to, if you like, give the details of the notified body who has been involved, and indeed reference any certificates that the notified body has issued. But yeah, fundamentally, the declaration needs to be drawn up and signed by, again, if you like, this is an interesting point that comes up, a suitably qualified and experienced person with an appropriate position of authority and seniority,
Right.
from within the manufacturer. Now,
I can imagine that leads to a lot of discussions within
well, I
manufacturing
mean,
teams.
it can do, because the PED doesn't sort of get into that sort of area at all. It just leaves it effectively to the manufacturer to decide who is the qualified person to sign. And let's remember, this is a legally binding declaration.
Yeah.
That is being issued on behalf of the manufacturer. So, you want, hopefully, for that to be done by somebody who's, as I say, got the necessary knowledge and authority to either sign the declaration if they are satisfied,
Yeah.
or indeed potentially not sign the declaration of conformity in cases where they're not, if you like, entirely happy. So yeah, and in terms of the sort of interest of the notified body in the declaration of conformity itself, again, that's an area where there are sort of different views.
Right.
My own personal view, from previous experience of working, within notified bodies, was that because it's our details are actually part of this legal document.
You mean
Then
you mean the NOBO point of view?
the notified body, yeah. I believe we have a sort of legitimate interest in being happy that the declaration that includes our company details is basically correct, in terms of the information. Other parties sort of view it as nothing to do with us. It's purely and 100% the responsibility of the manufacturer. So,
Right.
that's my own view in any case.
Yeah, that might so it will depend on who you have in front of you and which notified body you're working with, etc., and how that works out in practice. All right. Well, I mean, thanks, Colin. Let me just stop sharing my screen. All right, before I do that, let me first segue back for a second into the masterclasses. So I mean, Colin, thanks for sharing. And as I said, to the audience, we will be running a series of masterclasses that have, become the new format on EngineeringTrainer.com, the latest addition to our portfolio. And together with Colin, we will run one on May 8th on the topic of the role of harmonized and the non-harmonized standards. It's free for any of our business users or enterprise users to join, but also non-enterprise users can join at a small fee. If this topic is relevant for you, I do invite you to check it out. And also in the show notes of this video, there's a link where you can claim a discount voucher to use on EngineeringTrainer.com for any purchase of your liking. Having said that, let me just segue back to our double view. There we go. Colin, it was a pleasure. I think it was a very interesting conversation, and it's really great to hear from somebody who's involved in in the politics and the processes behind it, on having those contexts being shared. So I highly appreciate that.
Thank you, Luke. And I hope that the technical issues didn't ultimately impact too much on the discussion. But no, I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
All
hope
right.
it's been helpful for those joining.
Yeah, and technicalities. There's some issues that can happen, but we're really happy that we could have this discussion and have people join it. Having said that, Colin, thanks for joining. To all the people listening and logging in, thanks for doing so. Make sure to check out our YouTube channel as well for other previously held live streams. And on EngineeringTrainer.com, you can also find several links also in the footer of the website to the upcoming live streams as well. Looking forward to having people joining those future live sessions as well. And having said that, let's wrap up this one. Colin, thanks again. Viewers, thanks again, and have a great day to all of you.
Yeah.